for the violence in Charlottesville. Let's bring in our analysts and our specialists. And Cornell, Republican sources telling CNN that several administrations are very unhappy with the way the president handled his comments yesterday. But I want you to listen to what Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut had to say. Quote, White House staff have effectively been folded into the white supremacy propaganda operation. Your choice, stay or go. Do you believe that officials staying in the Trump White House effectively are, in his words, folding into the white supremacy propaganda operation?
I'm reminded of the words of a former professor and Nobel laureate, Elie Wiesel, who said the opposite of love is not hate but indifference. The country's not prepared to believe that the White House staff and the president are hateful bigots, but whether or not they're indifferent to the bigotry and the hate in our country, that appears to be more and more true each day. And to the degree that you stay and work with this administration, enable and empower this president, you are contributing, not alleviating the problem.
You know, Gloria, a lot of Republicans have been very critical. They've been issuing tough statements. Some of them have even named the president specifically for what he said yesterday, the way he put the blame on both sides. I was reminded of how specific Mitt Romney was last year when I interviewed him about what the president was saying as a candidate. And here's the clip. Watch this.
He's demonstrated who he is, and I've decided that a person of that nature should not be the one who, if you will, becomes the example for coming generations or the example of America to the world. Look, I don't want to see trickle-down racism. I don't want to see a president of the United States saying things which change the character of the generations of Americans that are following. Presidents have an impact on the nature of our nation, and trickle-down racism, trickle-down bigotry, trickle-down misogyny, all these things are extraordinarily dangerous to the heart and character of America. And so I'm not looking for Mr. Trump to change a policy that more aligns with my own. This is not a matter of just policy. It's more a matter of character and integrity.
You think he's a racist?
Oh, I think his comments time and again appeal to the racist tendency that exists in some people, and I think that's very dangerous.
Very strong words from Mitt Romney. That was more than a year ago. Why aren't we hearing Republicans, by and large, go out, do interviews? We've invited many of them to come on this program. And if they feel that strongly, as Mitt Romney did then, say publicly how they feel.
I agree with you, and I want to point out that Mitt Romney tweeted after the famous press conference yesterday to the president. It's clear he's referring to the president. He said, no, not the same. One side is racist, bigoted, Nazi. The other opposes racism and bigotry, morally different universes. But Romney's not an elected official. Elected officials, I believe, should not be shy about going on television right now and publicly taking on the president on this. I mean, we've seen in tweets John McCain, Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, but these people were never Trump supporters in the first place. A lot of them are clearly afraid of alienating some of their voters who may support Donald Trump no matter what. But I think there are certain moments in history where you have to, particularly as an elected official, say what you stand for. And this isn't about taxes, this isn't about health care reform, this is about basic humanity and the history of this country, not only the history, but what happens going forward. Now, members of Congress are out of town, they don't have an immediate bully pulpit, but I guarantee you that as your people have been calling around, you've gotten a lot of no's.
You know, but the source close to the White House says the president, in these words, is without regret about yesterday's performance. David Swerdlick, what does that say to you?
So, Wolf, the president was at pains yesterday to drill down on a couple of these points, right? He wanted to make the point that not everybody who wants to preserve the Lee statue is a racist. That's true. He wanted to make the point that, everybody has a right to freedom of speech, even racists. That is also true. He made this public safety point about no side can use violence. All of those things are true. What he failed to apprehend, either intentionally or just by accident, is that that's not what people have been calling on him to do since Saturday. Since Saturday, they've been calling for him to make a statement like the one that Governor Romney made, totally putting racism in one corner and putting the rest of decent society and Americanness in the other corner. And he didn't convince people that he really believed that at that moment when he made his statement.
You know, Bianna, we all noticed today that the president had to disband 2 of his advisory councils, including some very, very high-powered CEOs, because they were fleeing. They were resigning en masse, and those 2 councils were not going to exist much longer. What were the factors that convinced these CEOs to abandon the president?
Yeah, the president can say that he disbanded him, but, you know, these CEOs were breaking up with him way beforehand, especially over the last 48 hours. You know, these councils are traditionally prestigious, and they're not really risky. People join, CEOs join these councils to pursue their own business-friendly policies with the president, to show their shareholders and customers that they have the president's ears. I think regardless of what a lot of CEOs personally felt about this president, they thought that he would be offering more business-friendly priorities and policies like deregulation, tax reform, what have you. They did not think that they would have to be answering questions from reporters as to whether or not they support Nazis and white supremacists. So you're seeing this evolve over time now, where there, in fact, is more pressure on them from their shareholders, from their customers, quite frankly, from themselves when they look at themselves in the mirror as well. And you're seeing a real difference from a president who throughout his career ran a privately held company versus publicly held companies, which have shareholders to account to and to answer to, and their own customers. And these companies traditionally are held to higher moral and social standards. If any of these CEOs, if any employees at these companies would have done half of the things or said half of the things that this president has said thus far, they would have been fired, as we've seen over the past year and a half. And what's interesting, Wolf, is that we're seeing now internally, we're hearing the differences within this own administration. Axios is reporting that Steve Bannon, for instance, was happy to hear that these globalists were leaving. Obviously, this is Gary Cohen's issue with Steve Bannon, but that he was very happy to hear that these councils were disseminated. But this is a huge blow to this president, who considered himself a very pro-business president, and you factor that against President Obama, who you remember with the bank CEO said, "I'm the only one standing between you and the pitchforks out there." A lot of these CEOs expected more pro-business policy, not Nazi talk from this administration.
Ron Braunstein, go ahead.
I was going to say that, you know, and in fact, I think to just continue on Bianna's point, I think the business departures, the exodus of business leaders is sort of a leading indicator of the situation Republican elected officials may find themselves in. Because by and large, these were people who agree with the president's economic agenda, who maybe on trade they're in a different place, but by and large they want less regulation, lower taxes. But nonetheless, they concluded that his views on racial and social issues were so toxic that they could not afford to associate with him, given all of their other constituencies internally and externally. And I think Republicans in Congress are in a somewhat analogous position, where essentially they have been trying for 2 years now to turn their heads away as much as they can from all of the racial signaling and divisiveness that have been intrinsic to the president's message since the first day he came down the escalator, in the hope that they can work together on other fronts like cutting taxes and cutting regulation. And I think the clear risk to them is that the president is defining the Republican Party as a party of racial intolerance, precisely as we are going through this enormous generational transition, where the millennial generation, which is the most diverse in American history, in 2018 for the first time will be the largest generation in terms of eligible voters, surpassing the baby boom. And what comes after them are the post-millennials, which are even more diverse than the millennial generation. And Republicans who, like Paul Ryan, who says he is a disciple of Jack Kemp, who are kind of saying, okay, I'm trying to look away because I want to cut taxes, I want to cut regulation, have to consider not only the moral implications, but the long-term political implications of seeming to tolerate this level of intolerance from the Oval Office.
You know, Cornell, you're a former president and CEO of the NAACP. The president suggested this is simply a fight about removal of Confederate statues, and he went one step further. He said these were fine people and they were arguing about this, and he equated removing these Confederate statues to removing statues, memorials, monuments to America's founding fathers. Your reaction to that argument he was making?
The argument is morally vacuous. It's disingenuous. The fact of the matter is monuments to Confederate heroes as opposed to founding fathers. Two different categories. Generals led armies, Confederate generals led armies to break up the Union. they were committing an act of treason. Let's be very clear about this. And for him to introduce this whole issue of the Confederate generals at a moment where people wanted him to speak out against the alt-right, Nazis, neo-Klansmen, white supremacists, white nationalists, he introduced an argument that really had nothing to do with the moral moment in which he found himself in and the nation found himself in. We found ourselves in. And so the point being here is that this president has misread the country, the mood of the country, the need for gravitas, and he is in fact engaged in, again, appealing to a narrow sliver of his base.
You know, I've watched politicians twist themselves into pretzels during the campaign after the Judge Curiel incident, when even Paul Ryan came out and said, you know, I think it was a racist remark. I've watched them twist themselves into pretzels because Republicans were so happy that they finally had a Republican president and a Republican Congress, and they felt that they could get their agenda through. But this issue keeps rearing its ugly head over and over and over again. And at a certain point, these politicians have to say, what is important to me as an elected official of this country, given where we have come from and given where I think we are headed. And so I think it's kind of a serious tipping point here, if you will. Yeah. And I do want to hear from more of them. I mean, we understand where the Democrats are on this, and you could read whatever into that you want, whether it's political or whatever. But from Republicans who are conservative, who don't agree with the president on this, it's not enough to just say, I'm against Nazis. That's easy to say, okay? It has to be more personal to this president, and some of them ought to go to the White House, and some of them ought to ask to either meet with the president or meet with Kelly and find out what's going to happen next and how they're going to go forward.
Yeah, Ron, you know, so many of these Republicans, though, we've invited so many to come on, they're in hiding right now.
Right.
Yeah, they are. And Wolf, look, I mean, historically, there are not a lot of cases of parties, in effect, having to quarantine a president from their own side. But on the other hand, you know, as I looked at this recently, every time we have seen members of Congress stand up to a president in their own party on an important issue, usually around kind of the state of the nation kind of quality level things, they've had to do it at a moment when he was still popular with the party base. When William Fulbright held the hearings on Vietnam in 1966, Lyndon Johnson still had overwhelming support among Democrats. When Republicans in the Senate voted to create the Senate Watergate Committee in 1973, Nixon still had overwhelming support among Republicans. There have been times in our history when even people in their own party as the president have concluded that the national interest demands a more serious posture. And that is something that is possible here. I mean, you know, the business executives in many ways have shown that it is possible to agree with the president on his economic agenda and still conclude that what he is doing in terms of dividing the country and sending racial signals is unacceptable. If they can do it, it really does beg the question of why a Paul Ryan is not.
Usually, Bianna, after a moment like this, a president tries to heal. I remember in 1995, after the Oklahoma City bombing, President Clinton went to Oklahoma City at that memorial service, did a major job healing the country. As far as you know, was there ever any serious consideration in the White House to President Trump going to Charlottesville for today's memorial service for Heather Heyer?
Well, as far as I know, as far as yesterday was concerned from the press conference, he had not reached out to her family yet. So obviously a lot of people were hoping and even expecting him to attend that memorial service. I know throughout the campaign and even into this early presidency, a lot of people were talking, and sources close to this administration were worried about what kind of consoler-in-chief this president would be, what kind of national healing would he bring to a country that clearly is divided and only getting more and more divided. Instead, all that he's able to do is incite more division and take away any sort of blame that he as commander-in-chief does hold. I would also argue, Wolf, that it weakens us from an international standpoint as well. I think a lot of countries are following what's happening here very closely and are going to be able to use that as propaganda at home to say to their own people. And I'm talking about Vladimir Putin, I'm talking about North Korea, I'm talking about Iran, I'm talking about a lot of other countries that know our history. I would even argue better than this U.S. president knows our history, and can use this as propaganda with their own people, saying America promotes itself as a democracy-loving nation. Look at this.
Very important point. People all over the world are watching.
People are watching. Compare and contrast to President Obama. In 2008, when he was running for president, people questioned his allegiance to Reverend Wright. He came out and gave the more perfect union speech. It left people with a clear interpretation of where he stood on race relations. The Gabby Giffords speech when she was shot, Congresswoman Giffords. His 2014 speech on immigration. On and on down the list. The Mother Emanuel Church, when President Obama went there to that memorial. President Obama, I think the difference between him and President Trump is that when you've thought deeply about these issues, you can jump in as the consoler-in-chief, the bridge builder. President Trump is a little rudderless on some of these points.
All right, stand by, everybody. We're going to have more on the breaking news, including the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff over at the Pentagon speaking volumes by condemning racism after the president's rant about the violence in Charlottesville and the battle over removing symbols of the Confederacy.
Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson?
Are taking a stand against racism and bigotry just hours after the Commander-in-Chief sent the American people a different message. Let's bring in our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. Barbara, this is a rather unusual move by members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
That's right, Wolf. The Joint Chiefs are some of the nation's top military personnel. They say, always, they do not get involved in politics. They do not challenge the President of the United States. But they are stepping into this national conversation. All of the chiefs of the U.S. military branches have taken the extraordinarily rare step of publicly weighing in on the violence in Charlottesville.
Now, here's the thing.
Now, a political crisis for President Trump. Beginning just hours after the demonstrations turned deadly, the Chief of Naval Operations first tweeted, "Events in Charlottesville unacceptable and mustn't be tolerated. U.S. Navy forever stands against intolerance and hatred." An aide says Richardson tweeted because Charlottesville was a significant event that caught the country's attention.
I know John Richardson very well. He was not being political. He was just very quickly saying, Navy, these are our standards. This is what we will live by.
Defense Secretary James Mattis offering a single comment.
I would just tell you, I was saddened very saddened by what I saw.
Aides are adamant the military is not challenging President Trump, but Richardson and the other chief who left the Marine Corps in January leads a white supremacist group called Vanguard America. Marine Corps Commandant General Robert Neller tweeted, "No place for racial hatred or extremism in U.S. Marine Corps. Our core values of honor, courage, and commitment frame the way Marines live and act." They were followed by the heads of the Air Force and National Guard tweeting they stand with their fellow chiefs, condemning racism, extremism, and hatred.
This national conversation is about American values, what we hold dear, what we expect our servicemen and women to defend and to fight for.
It may not be about politics, but this very rare move by the Joint Chiefs is getting a lot of attention. Wolf?
Certainly is. Barbara Starr at the Pentagon, thank you very much. I want to get some more perspective on this very rare move by the Joint Chiefs. We're joined by our Chief National Security Correspondent, Jim Sciutto, and our CNN military and diplomatic analyst, retired Rear Admiral John Kirby. It's almost an ironclad rule that the military leadership does not get involved in politics, but this situation is different.
No question. And listen, they have been caveating these public statements by saying, listen, this is just meant for the Corps. This is not directly contradicting the president. But let's be frank here. The four chiefs who don't like to make statements really at all tied to politics in quick succession, starting on Saturday with the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral John Richardson, made very public statements while not mentioning the president that directly contradicted the president's meaning and his words. I spoke to the staff of the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral John Richardson, and they said to me specifically that that message was meant not just for naval service members, but for the public as well. Because he saw what was happening, there, and he wanted to go on the record to say that. Now, the military chiefs have to say, and understandably, that this was not meant to contradict the commander-in-chief. But let's be frank, the four of them had a unified voice here that gave a contradictory message, frankly, to the president.
John Kirby, you know these chiefs. You've worked closely with them. Why do you think they felt compelled at this moment in our history to join this conversation?
I think what happened was so egregious, so terrible, and unfolding on national television that they couldn't ignore this. This is about leadership. General Hertling in that piece with Barbara's right. This is about core values. This is about what you sign up for when you sign up to defend this country in uniform. And I feel it was really important for them, I believe, to make sure they communicated not just to the American people, but to potential recruits, to moms and dads that are thinking about putting their sons and daughters, off on that bus to boot camp, that this is who we are, and just as importantly, Wolf, this is not who we are.
You know, the former CIA director, John Brennan, he wrote to me last night after the show. Just let me tell you a couple of things he said. He said, Mr. Trump's words and the beliefs they reflect are a national disgrace, and all Americans of conscience need to repudiate his ugly and dangerous comments. If allowed to continue along this senseless path, Mr. Trump will do lasting harm to American society and to our standing in the world. By his words and his actions, Mr. Trump is putting our national security and our collective futures at grave risk.
Well, this is the meaning of Nazism. I don't have to tell you with your own family history. This is the meaning and the legacy of Nazism. 6 million deaths. That was what happened. That's what the Nazis carried out. The president either doesn't know that history or doesn't respect it based on his public comments. That's the truth of it. And keep in mind, it's not the first time the president has used that word Nazi. Remember, he used it to describe his own intelligence community, obviously something that, well, unusual for a commander-in-chief to do, but one that there really is no comparison between the U.S. intelligence community and what the Nazis carried out. So either it is willful ignorance of the legacy of Nazism or something else. But his words do not reflect the actual legacy.
When he was criticizing the U.S. intelligence community, he didn't like the leaks. He said, "What is?" In a tweet, he said, "What is this, Nazi Germany?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know it's incredible the hypocrisy here at play. But I associate myself with Director Brennan's comment. I think we are reaching a very dangerous point here, and there are real national security crises that need the president to step up, and he's got to have the support of his leadership, which means he has to be a more inclusive leader than he has been to date.
And you think people all over the world, countries all over the world, friends and adversaries, they're watching this obviously very closely?
Absolutely, they are, every single day. And I can tell you, many of them that I've spoken to out there, they're disconcerted. They're worried about where American leadership is going in the world.
He's got to do something in the next few days to try to fix this. Let's see what he does, guys. Thanks very, very much. An important moment in the country's history right now. Finally tonight, I want to end our program with some happy news to share. We're welcoming 2 new members of the Situation Room team. Meet Spencer Kai McConnell, weighing in at just over 7 pounds. Our great producer, Dougal McConnell, reports that he and his wife, Nicole, and baby Spencer, they are all doing well. Also joining us, meet Evelyn June Allen, daughter of our CNN political analyst Jackie Kucinich and her husband Jared. Evelyn is a healthy 6 pounds, 12 ounces. We want to wish both of these wonderful families all of the very, very best. Very cute babies as well. That's it for me. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. Aaron Burnett Out Front starts right now.
Out front next, no apology, no regrets. President Trump defiant in the face of growing criticism at home and around the world. Can the damage be undone? Plus, undercover with white supremacists, a former FBI agent on how the Klan and neo-Nazis are celebrating President Trump's words. And we're going to take you to the next possible battleground over a Confederate statue. Could that city become another Charlottesville? Let's go out front. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kate Baldwin in for Aaron Burnett. Out front tonight, no regrets. President Trump defiant and not apologizing in the wake of his extraordinary defense of white supremacists, saying both sides share blame for the deadly violence in Charlottesville. Tonight, the president increasingly isolated, the widespread condemnation growing louder. CEOs, one after the other, abandoning the president. The exodus so dramatic that 2 of Trump's business advisory councils are disbanding. World leaders from Germany, Ireland, the UK, even Iran, coming out against Trump's words. Both Presidents Bush issued a statement calling for the rejection of bigotry, anti-Semitism, and hatred in all its forms. Former CIA Director John Brennan, writing to our Wolf Blitzer this, a blistering criticism saying, quote, Mr. Trump's words and the beliefs they reflect are a national disgrace. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, a frequent Trump critic, telling me this, Mr. President, I encourage you to try to bring us together as a nation after this horrific event in Charlottesville. Your words are dividing Americans, not healing them. But the Republican leaders in Congress, Senator Mitch McConnell, Speaker Ryan, going nowhere near that. Senator Mitch McConnell is said to be privately upset at Trump, but publicly has only issued a statement saying, in part, this. We can have no tolerance for an ideology of racial hatred. There are no good neo-Nazis. Let's be clear on this. There's nothing heroic about calling out neo-Nazis in 2017 in the United States of America. But that is as far as leaders like McConnell and Speaker Ryan would go. Ryan tweeting this, white supremacy is repulsive. There can be no moral ambiguity. So there you have that. Jeff Zeleny is out front tonight with much more on all of this. Jeff, you're hearing more about the president's mindset and what the staff is thinking. What are they thinking?
Good evening, Kate. The president is defiant. I talked to two people close to the White House who visited Trump Tower today, and that was the word that they used, defiant in the face of all of this. And they also said no regret. The president does not regret this. Now, that is not that surprising. President Trump regrets a little. At least he admits regretting very little. But I can tell you, Kate, this was something that has shaken the staff at the White House, particularly the CEOs fleeing the Business Council. The White House being forced today to abandon ship. That was one of the president's prides and joy. He loved having CEOs into the White House. Now they did not want to be associated with him. So the question here is going forward, how long will people stay silent? Silence from Ivanka Trump, from Jared Kushner, Gary Cohn, others who are central to this here. And it is becoming more difficult for them to stay silent. There are people, outside groups, calling on them to react here. We do not believe that they will. But going forward, this is also complicating the president's agenda. I talked to someone who's in charge of helping to set that agenda, enact it on Capitol Hill, and he said, yes, this is going to make it much more difficult. So at the end of the day here, yes, this will probably blow over. No, there will not be a lot of mass resignations, at least we don't believe. But it is one more thing that makes it more difficult for the president to get people on board with him. Chief of Staff John Kelly, I'm told he urged staff members to keep their heads down, focus on their work. As for his future, I asked one official if they thought John Kelly would stick around, and they said, God, I hope so. Okay.
Wow, Jeff, that's a telling statement. Blow over for the staff, maybe. Blow over for this country, we'll see. Thanks, Jeff. Great to see you. Out front tonight, David Gergen. He served as an advisor to 4 presidents. John Avlon is here, editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast. And Perry Bacon is senior political writer for 538. Guys, great to have you here. John, the president, defiant and, quote, without regret. What does that mean?
Well, it means that he's reverting to type. It's a kind of denial for Donald Trump, right? It's whatever criticism comes in, he's going to say, they must be wrong, I must be right, I live in a Trump-centric universe. Here's the thing. All his key allies and the people he admires most, Donald Trump likes strongmen, he admires businessmen, he just got rejected by basically every CEO who agreed to serve as an advisory council. And he tried to present it as a firing, but what it really was is, you just quit, you can't quit, I'll fire you first. The Joint Chiefs, the military leaders are coming out releasing statements condemning hate and racism, obviously not directly criticizing the president, but implicitly it could not be clearer. And to the larger point, when the President of the United States refuses to call out neo-Nazi hate, not only that is a national disgrace, that is an indelible mark on the office as long as he holds it. So they can hope this will blow over and they'll be able to distract with some other kind of news cycle, but they're playing in deeper waters than they ever done before, and history as well as his contemporaries are going to be incredibly unkind for a long time.
Well, and history is a big part of this. I mean, David, 2 White House officials tell Jim Acosta they don't believe that the president's comments are going to cause any long-term damage. Nothing disqualifying, one of them said. They've decided it's all okay. Does that make it really all okay?
No. Who could have imagined we'd reached the point where the CEOs of this country have more of a social conscience than the President of the United States. I think that that's unprecedented. I cannot remember a moment, you know, after all, they're supposed to be all about capitalism and making money.
And rejecting the
CEO
CEO president.
Yes, but in this case, you know, they had two councils, and one of them today got on the phone, and they basically reached a consensus that they should disband. I think it was a smart, wise move. And as John said, then the president issued a statement saying, I disbanded them. It wasn't his idea. He didn't want to disband them. He was facing, you know, a revolt from the people who should be the closest to him. And there are ripple effects from this. I don't think he's going to clean this up. But there are ripple effects that go into his legislative agenda. They go into the questions, renewing questions about his fitness to serve, a lot of different things about his emotional and mental health. We're going to hear more about that here in days ahead.
Perry, Vice President Mike Pence, he's been traveling. He didn't comment on the president's statement that there were good people on both sides. He didn't comment on that today when asked. Here is what he did say, though. Listen.
What happened in Charlottesville was a tragedy. And the president has been clear on this tragedy, and so have I. I spoke at length about this heartbreaking situation on Sunday night in Columbia. And I stand with the president.
Should anyone expect anything different from a vice president, Perry?
I don't think in this case you are, and I guess the simple reason is the politics of this are Donald Trump may have done something a lot of people disagree with, that it seems obviously a mistake as a president. He right now has about an 80% approval rating among Republicans, and so I think that is the answer and the explanation fully for why Mike Pence, Mitch McConnell, and Paul Ryan are not condemning him by name, because he's the leader of the party. He's popular in the party right now. I assume they want futures in the party, and I think that's explains why they're behaving the way they are. Like, they are trying to kind of dance in this way where they criticize Trump's remarks and disavow them, but not criticize Trump himself, and that's a very hard line to draw.
Well, some are drawing the line, John. I mean, you've got some key Republicans, Senator John McCain, Senator Lindsey Graham, calling the president out by name. Those are not a surprise. No. Those are people who have done that. Those are people who are critics of the president. But Republican leaders have not. I mean, I think it's important to say things that are not hard to do is denounce racism.
Or denounce Nazis.
Anti-Semitism, neo-Nazis. Need I go on? Things that seem to be harder to do for Republicans, though, right now, is call out the president when he isn't denouncing it really himself. Are they afraid of something?
Look, I think they're trying to walk a line in which there's not a lot of room for subtlety, which is your point. Look, they're trying to see if they can salvage something resembling a legislative agenda.
This is an obvious line.
Yeah, this is
if there's ever been a line, welcome to it.
And
I'm dancing on it right now.
Yeah, and there is a line, and this should be an existential crisis. It is an existential crisis for the party of Lincoln. If they want to hold up that legacy at any point, this is a fundamental contradiction to all those alleged values. And at some point, you got to say, you know what, we have to call it out because party asks a lot, principles should ask more.
Or am I being wrong? Am I wrong, David? Does it matter if they call the president out by name or not?
I think it matters. Sure, it matters. They need to be on record. This is, I think John's got a good point again. It has been the party of Lincoln historically. It does not want to become the party of Trump, which has an anti-Lincoln, kind of quality to it. And I think it's a real danger for the party. It does seem to me that there's a role that Republican leaders could play, which is quieter but very important. And that is we now know the generals can't control it. You know, he's got 4 generals around. You know, one of them, his chief of staff's got his head in his hands. What the hell happened yesterday? He's got another one, his NSC director. He's being chased down. You know, they're trying to push him out from the alt-right. He's got 2 other trying to clean up what he's been saying about North Korea.
Right. Let's dispel with the idea that a 70-year-old man can be, or even should be, we should think about babysat.
Well,
I mean,
as a point of personal privilege, can I say maybe we can change this a little bit here and there?
Keep going, David.
But I think now we know that the generals can't contain him. I do think that the Republican Party ought to seriously consider sending a delegation quietly to see him at night for dinner, quietly, and say, Mr. President, unless you clean up your act, unless you become more civilized and more empathic and more outreach, we are going to separate out from you and go our own way on your legislative agenda. We're going to take over from here. we can't work with you on this sort of thing. It'd make it impossible. We can't do this when the public is so heavily against it.
Has anyone had to do that before with the president?
Yes, it happened with Nixon. Yeah, the Republican delegation made a big point with him toward the end of his regime, and one of the reasons he left. I don't think we're at that point, but I do think we're at a point where he has to deal with this. He's got to deal with his inner demons, whatever they are.
That's very significant coming from David, right? Because he obviously served in the Nixon White House and recalls that time. What he's calling for basically is a civil intervention well ahead of any
around the president, in the president's life. And I'm talking about his daughter and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Where are they right now? Other than, obviously, they say they're in Vermont. But where are they?
What I can tell is where are they is they want to make anonymous comments to journalists and say, we disavow this and we don't like it, but not do anything in public. I mean, I'm glad Jeff has their reporting, but throughout the day we heard Gary Cohn, Ivanka Trump, Jared, they don't like these remarks, you know, according to sources close to them. If they want to do something, they can do something. Otherwise, I prefer them to stop talking to reporters anonymously. I would say the one thing I think is significant in terms of the Republican Party, John Kasich has been out there today talking. I do think Trump's behavior this weekend increases the chances of a lot of Republicans deciding we need someone down the line to run as our candidate in 2020 who we feel comfortable voting for. I think John Kasich is raising himself up as someone who would be that person. You could imagine a Ben Sasse being that person. I do think Trump's behavior is moving toward almost inevitably some kind of serious party challenge among Republicans who just do not want to vote for him a second time.
A primary challenge for a sitting president. We are a ways away from that. Who knows what can happen before then. Great to see you guys. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Out front next, undercover with neo-Nazis. My next guest, an FBI agent who infiltrated a hate group, why he says they are cheering tonight. Plus, President Trump's supporters, do they agree that both sides are to blame for Charlottesville? And Steve Bannon, in a new interview, says that he wants the Democrats to be talking about racism every day.
Aaron Burnett out front. Stories that matter.
You've got the money and you've got the passion, but how do you actually make a difference?
From the people making headlines.
Did you and Donald Trump talk?
With his party and the nation. Everything harder now. White House officials blindsided by the president's rant, now facing an even more difficult fight to move his agenda forward. We're going to tell you what we're hearing from insiders about the tensions within the Trump team. Executives revolt. A slew of business leaders stand up to the president by bowing out as members of his advisory councils, as Mr. Trump lost the confidence of corporate America. And remembering Heather, an emotional memorial in Charlottesville honoring the victim of the car attack on counter-protesters. Tonight, her parents are pleading with mourners to carry on the fight for equality and justice. We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Breaking tonight, sources tell CNN that President Trump is without regret, even as a crisis of his own making grows more explosive by the hour. His raging, unscripted remarks about the Charlottesville attacks leaving many Americans shocked, sad, and even appalled, while white supremacists appear to feel emboldened. Some top Republicans, including Senators Lindsey Graham, John McCain, and Marco Rubio, now are directly rebuking the president by name for reverting to his claim that both sides were to blame for the violence. Graham accusing Mr. Trump of dividing the nation. The president also is feeling the heat from corporate America. Two of his advisory councils have now been disbanded as more and more CEOs resigned in protest. America's top generals, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they're publicly taking a stand against racial hatred and extremism after the commander-in-chief's remarks. Also tonight, former CIA Director John Brennan is speaking out exclusively to CNN, saying President Trump is putting our national security and our collective futures at grave risk. That's a direct quote. As the nation grapples with the events of the past 5 days, an emotional memorial was held for Heather Heyer, who was killed when a car plowed into counter-protesters in Charlottesville. Her parents urging mourners to follow Heather's example and to stand up for civil rights against hatred. We're covering all of that, much more this hour with our guests, including Congressman Mark Vesey, and our correspondents and specialists are also standing by. First, let's go to our senior White House correspondent, Jim Acosta. Jim, how is the Trump team dealing with this huge backlash from the president's remarks?
Well, so far, the posture coming out of this White House is defiant. No apologies. The words of one White House advisor who put it to me earlier today, there is nothing disqualifying about the president's comments. Wolf, you can't set the bar much lower than that.
President Trump laid low, steering clear of the cameras, arriving back at his New Jersey golf club one day after his incendiary news conference on Charlottesville.
I think there's blame on both sides.
The president is said to have no regrets about his performance. Still, he's dealing with the consequences, announcing that he's shutting down 2 advisory boards due to defections from big business executives over his remarks, tweeting, "Rather than putting pressure on the business people of the Manufacturing Council and Strategy and Policy Forum, I am ending both. Thank you all." Top White House officials are backing the president, including Vice President Pence, who danced around a question about Trump's comments.
I spoke at length about this heartbreaking situation on Sunday night in Colombia. And I stand with the president, and I stand by those words.
For now, aides to the president and his key surrogates appear to be sticking to these White House talking points that read, the president was entirely correct. Both sides of the violence in Charlottesville acted inappropriately and bear some responsibility. An echo of the president's own words.
I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. And if you reported it accurately, you would say.
So the neo-Nazis started this. They showed up in Charlottesville. They showed up in Charlottesville to protest the removal of that statue.
And you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Other signs the White House is trying to ride out the storm. Chief of Staff John Kelly emerged from Trump Tower, frustrated but still very much on the job, while the president promoted his longtime aide Hope Hicks to be his interim communications director. They'll be dealing with mounting outrage among Republicans in Congress. From GOP Senator Lindsey Graham, who issued a statement saying many Republicans do not agree with and will fight back against the idea that the party of Lincoln has a welcome mat for the David Dukes of the world, to Senator Cory Gardner.
The president should have immediately denounced the racism, the bigotry, the hatred that he saw in Charlottesville. The president should have done that immediately. The president was wrong to do that, and I've said that loud and clear.
But it's not clear GOP leaders are going to do much about it. Both Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and House Speaker Paul Ryan expressed their disappointment and not much more. Though one Republican source told CNN, "I think the president's ability to effectively govern is dwindling by the hour." Many in the party are still shell-shocked by the president's comments.
So, this week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week, and is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop?
With the president back at Bedminster, one Michigan Republican congressman offered one suggestion to Mr. Trump: go back on vacation, tweeting, "I think America needs more unity and less divisiveness," meaning Donald Trump should focus more on golf and have less press conferences.
Now, some White House officials, I'm told, are upset by the president's comments, but consider how one aide put it to me, Wolf. Nothing surprises me. People around this White House saw President Trump survive the Access Hollywood video scandal. They think he can survive this too. Wolf.
We'll see. Jim Acosta, thank you very much. Let's go to Charlottesville, Virginia right now, where the pain from the white supremacist rally is very, very deep, still very raw. Let's go to Brian Todd. He's outside the site of the memorial service for Heather Heyer, the 32-year-old woman who was killed during a counter-protest. Brian, Heather Heyer's mother gave a very, very moving and powerful address.
She certainly did, Wolf. You know, this ceremony was attended by every top state official, from Governor Terry McAuliffe to U.S. senators to the mayor of Charlottesville. But as you mentioned, it was the sentiment from Heather Heyer's family which really drew the emotion from the crowd. Her mother, Susan Breaux, said, quote, "They tried to kill my child to shut her up, but guess what? You just magnified her." That really drew a heavy round of applause. Here's what else Susan Breaux had to say about her daughter.
We are going to have our differences. We are going to be angry with each other. But let's channel that anger not into hate, not into violence, not into fear, but let's channel that difference that anger into righteous action. I want you to pay attention, find what's wrong, don't ignore it, don't look the other way. You make a point to look at it and say to yourself, what can I do to make a difference? And that's how you're going to make my child's death worthwhile. I'd rather have my child.
New information to report on something President Trump said yesterday. He said a couple of times in that news conference that the counter-protesters who went against the white supremacists did not have permits to be there. Well, we have found out from city officials just moments ago that the counter-protesters indeed did have 2 permits. They had 2 permits to protest in 2 other parks in downtown Charlottesville. But as for showing up at Emancipation Park where the white supremacists were, the city official told me just moments ago that they did not need protests to be there on the streets around that park or to enter that park that day, Wolf. But they did have 2 permits to be elsewhere in the city.
Interesting. Brian, authorities are also getting more information, but still the number of actual arrests is tiny, right?